Welcome back to Behind the Play. My name is Alex Adams, and today I'm joined by a force in the media, hockey media sphere, the one and only Steve Dangle. Thanks so much for doing this, Steve. Before we get started, I just want to say how big a fan I am of your work, and you're definitely someone I look up to in the 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 hockey sphere of media, and I think I listen to almost every podcast. So I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on.
No problem at all, man. Thank you for having me.
I just want to ask a little bit about like the origin of Steve Dangle. I know you started back in 2007. Just what made you want to start a YouTube channel? And I know the name Dangle doesn't really originate from the hockey term for dangle. So maybe tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it originates from my old high school newspaper. I It was a tradition to come up with a silly nickname for yourself, and I saw the name Floyd Dangle and thought it was really funny. And so I was Steve Floyd Dangle Glynn, and then when I made my YouTube channel, I was like, well, I shouldn't use my real name. I should use I don't know, some sort of stage name, but I didn't have one. So I made it Steve Dangle, but then I didn't make a video for months and months. So when I finally made a video, I was like, oh shoot, I should change it, and I didn't realize that it was Steve Dangle. And then I was talking about hockey. I'm like, wait, that's actually perfect, and I left it, and now that's my name.
And with that, like what made you want to start the channel just, 15, 16 years ago?
I wanted experience, especially on camera.
Mm.
Um, a lot of the people I went to school with, I was in my second year of university. A lot of people I went to school with, they had jobs and they had internships, and I worked at the Toronto Zoo. Like I didn't really have anything practical in media, so it was sort of like a self-appointed internship I could give myself. I didn't take any on-camera courses in school beyond the bare minimum that we had to take. Um, it's not really where I thought my future was.
Mm.
And I didn't think it was in sports either, because it's not like I grew up as an athlete. I played some sports, didn't play hockey. So a lot of luck.
Hmm. And with that, like, why do you think that the LFRs that you originated with just became so successful? And what do you think you resonated with other fans just in those videos?
Well, I think a very important thing is I stuck to it. Like I see a ton of people start a podcast or start a YouTube channel or whatever. They do it for, a few days, a few weeks, a few months, and then they abandon it. And it's like, well, what was the point?
Mm.
Um, you know, Not a lot of people watch my stuff for a very long time. And, it was difficult to get motivated at times. I won't lie to you. But I kept at it, and I was pretty mediocre at it with mediocre viewership for 5 or 6 years before things eventually, uh, picked up for me in a big way. But I think what resonates with people is passion. And, I'm there, a lot of people's inner dialogue manifested. I say a lot of the things that you know people think and they would like to talk about, but they're too embarrassed to say it to their coworkers or their spouses uh, about their favorite team. Like I think a lot of it was catharsis in the beginning because the Leafs were so bad,
Mm.
and now there's more of a story, more of a journey with this Leafs team because there's so much good, and we also know the bad. So it's tantalizing.
Yeah, and with that, like, when did you first, or when did you feel as though you maybe were honing in on the craft of making LFRs?
Oh, a bunch of different types.
Okay.
I thought in 2009 or 2010, a couple of years in, when I was making videos for Nike, I was like, I've made it. And then my content stagnated for a few years. looked like I was going to fold up shop, and NHL goes into a lockout. And I come back for the 2013 season, and I'm shot out of a cannon, and NHL viewers are very excited. My excitement was, matched their excitement, and it just sort of fed off of itself in a way. So 2013 is when it really started to take off. The 2 years later, Sportsnet hired me. And
Mm-hmm.
there again, I'm like, okay, I've made it again.
Yeah.
But even that was in a behind the scenes role, and my on camera development there was still a work in progress. Even now, owning a company and YouTube channel, has over 220,000 subscribers. It still feels like there's more to come.
Yeah.
I think like a pretty big made it moment was getting the silver play button for 100,000 subscribers, but now I have more than twice that amount of subscribers, and I still feel like I have a lot to prove.
And with that, like what just you mentioned obviously the podcast and obviously SDPN, your network. Just talk about maybe a bit about the podcast and how it started and maybe the genesis of you making that podcast with Adam Wild, Jesse Blake. I know Jesse Blake didn't start with you guys, but just talk about that.
Well, in some ways, the podcast started in 2003 or four when Adam and I were in the,
Hmm.
I think, 11th grade in math. We weren't good at math, so we were talking about what we want to do in the future. And we had a really cool teacher named Mr. Amani
Hmm.
who knew we weren't good at math. But he was basically like, listen, shut up in my class and, we'll give you some, do your best and we'll give you some free time at the end. And, one day we were bantering and Adam said, we're going to do a sports show together one day. So I stayed in Toronto and living with my parents and sort of wandered through the wilderness of the media landscape over here and editing highlights and sticking with my YouTube channel and stuff like that. All the while, Adam was, traveling around the country, hopping from place to place and moving, trying to advance his radio career. In 2013, when he finally moved back to Toronto for the second time, a little bit more permanently, that's when he and his coworker at Rogers, Chris Shapcott, decided, all right, let's try to make a podcast, and it took off kind of immediately because I already had this, kind of built-in online following.
Hmm.
And about a year later, Chris decided he wanted to pursue, other things with his career. But then Jesse joined us, and Jesse's obviously been incredible, and he's been with us for basically a decade now. So it's hard to remember a time where he wasn't a part of the show.
Why do you think the podcast has been so successful just between you three?
I think the LFRs really connect with people, but they're kind of fast. Like
Yeah.
even if the video is 15, 20 minutes long, it's still very rapid fire. There's jump cuts. It's an unnatural way of talking. The long form, I think, allows us to connect with people over a longer period of time, and it's easier to bond with people when you're given more time, and I think we keep each other honest, and we're able to have a full conversation. And I can't have a conversation with myself. LFR's LFR is more of a dissertation or like a sermon,
Yeah.
whereas the podcast is a group of guys who genuinely enjoy each other's company, just having a chat.
How intimidating was it for you to leave Sportsnet and go full time with SDPN, and just maybe talk about what you guys are doing at SDPN and why you've gone all in?
Yeah, it was intimidating because I mean it's I feel like most of the time you leave your job and go to another one or go to do something else, and you probably don't have to explain yourself quite as much as I did. Uh, a lot of people were like, "Oh, so you're leaving the NHL rights holder, even though you talk about the NHL, and you're leaving behind some security, and
Yeah.
now all the decisions that people complain about are your decisions, right? Like,
Mm.
there's, oh, Sportsnet did this, Sportsnet did that. Well, now, when you represent a company, everyone sort of looks at you for every victory and every defeat. So intimidating, but it was something like I knew was going to happen for a number of years. I just didn't know when.
Mm.
And it's not like I was sitting there at Sportsnet like, oh my God, get me out of here. Like I
Yeah.
really enjoyed my time there, but I thought doing this on my own, or rather doing the podcast network on our own, was an inevitability. So why not commit now?
What advice would you have to people coming up in the sports media industry or YouTubers just to become their own form of a Steve Dangle and be successful like you've been?
Learn how to do more than one thing. I see in a lot of young people and students in the industry, you do a lot of the same things that some people I went to school with did.
Mm.
And, unless you're starting your own business straight out of school, which is really difficult to do, you're probably not going to be on camera unless you go to like a really small market. Like you go to a small market, like I have friends who like went to Regina and
Mm.
Barrie and the I think Northwest Territories, like
Wow.
they've traveled very far to get different opportunities, but it's difficult to get a on camera or on mic opportunity if you don't know what you're doing technically, if you don't know how to operate audio or video equipment, if you don't know how to operate audio or video software, especially,
Mm.
those are jobs you can always fall back on if you decide you don't want to be the front facing person. And what so often happens today is you'll get into a place in a behind the scenes role. And if you just make it known that you'd like to find opportunities for yourself to talk on the mic as well or talk on camera, you'll eventually get those opportunities purely by being there.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
like you gotta get in the building,
Yeah.
right? And knowing the tech side of it, whether it's software or hardware, is so key. And I mean, there's also, if we're talking about quote unquote worst case scenarios, a lot of cameramen make pretty good dough.
Yeah.
It's kind of it's one of those things where all through school they told us, get a trade, and then none of us did. But the ones who did find a trade are all really well paid because they're so in demand.
Mm.
That's a lot of people who work with the hardware and software. Everyone wants to be front facing when they think of media,
Mm.
and they kind of leave behind a lot of the other important things. That and storytelling.
Yeah.
I think it's completely vital that you be a good storyteller.
How much did writing the book "This Team Is Ruining My Life" help just with LFRs, with sports now, with all the stuff that you're doing, just to basically have to write a whole book and tell stories?
It was good because I got to sort of evaluate my life.
Mm.
I got to kind of remember the order of things. I interviewed people in my life to make sure I remembered things, or things really were the way I remembered them. And I was happy to find out that was the case the
Hmm.
majority of the time. Um, it was also kind of, you just sort of live your life and, you maybe reminisce on moments, but you don't sort of look at the big picture. And it was really, um, it was a pretty neat experience to kind of look at my whole career on paper like that.
Yeah.
And, I was really proud for my parents who for many years had to struggle to explain what I do to
Mm.
their friends and family. And now finally they could be like, our son wrote a book.
Yeah.
And, I would get asked questions about the industry all the time, and my parents would get asked questions about me all the time. And now they and I were able to be like, why don't you read this book? You have all the answers that you desire.
Yeah. Yeah. But before I let you go, Steve, obviously you are the biggest Toronto Maple Leafs fan out there. So I first want to ask you the question that I'm sure you've been asked in variations many times, but do you believe that the Toronto Maple Leafs are cursed?
I don't think they're cursed. I've seen too many curses lifted in
Ah,
my life. I've seen too many teams win the cup for the first time. I've seen too many teams win a championship after 50 years, 100 years in the case of the Chicago Cubs. Like, the Leafs feel cursed, but I mean, they have nothing on the Chicago Cubs. Going, I think, 108 years. The Red
Red
Sox,
Sox.
I think, was 80.
Yep.
Like, and what are the Leafs special? They're no, they're more cursed than those guys. Like, I think it's just the self doubt in the fan base, and there were times I remember growing up when the Leafs were making it to the second and third round, and
Mm.
you genuinely believed they were going to win the cup because you're down to the final eight, you're down to the final four, right?
Yeah.
Not every team who wins the cup is necessarily the best team in the NHL.
Nope.
It's a battle to get there, and there's a lot of luck involved. And there's 32 teams, and you might say, well, Vegas just got here. Yeah, but that's leaving out a few details.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah. They.
one of the most unprecedented expansion drafts ever. They killed it and did extremely well. They went to the Cup final and had a 1-0 lead in it in 2018. It's I don't think they're cursed. I do think they're the leafiest team that ever leafed, but they're not cursed.
And what would you do if the leafiest team that ever lived won the cup? What would, like, I'm sure you've been asked this plenty times, but just what would you do, Steve?
I used to say I would go on a 72-hour bender, but now I'm a dad and I don't know if I can do that.
Okay.
But um, I'd cry a lot. I
Mm.
would make an unfathomable amount of content. Probably write a book. Probably do a 10-hour podcast on the entire playoff run. Um,
If
Probably make an unbelievable amount of money. Like, people keep talking about, like, oh man, your videos do better when they lose. Imagine when they finally win the cup.
would
This
you?
is this is the most viewed season in the history, or sorry, the most viewed calendar year in the history of my YouTube channel,
Yeah.
2023, like by a wide margin. And whoa, would you look at that? It's the year where we got um, more playoff videos than we've ever had because they actually won a round.
Yep. Would you have to get like crowdsourced to get you in the building for a game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals? Is that something would you feel as though you need to be in the building if it was in Toronto?
I wouldn't necessarily feel as if I had to be in the building because just I've been to like relative to how many games there are and relative to like a lot of my colleagues in the media, I've actually seen very few Leaf games in person.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've probably seen more than most, but I still only go to I don't know 3, 4
Okay.
a year. Like considering I cover them for a living, it's not a whole lot. Um, I feel like it might make my life easier to not be there.
Just because.
But like, how incredible would it be to say I was there? Say, imagine getting to go on the ice.
Ah,
Like one thing no one will ever be able to take away from me ever, if my career crashed and burned tomorrow, is I was in the building when Canada won gold in
I know.
in 20.
Yeah.
And man, it'd be a real feather in the cap to be there.
Yeah. I wasn't there at that game, but I was at the Jordan Eberle game, so I can always remember that game like it was yesterday. The first one, the one in Ottawa, not the craziness in Saskatoon, but yeah. So I know you were in Saskatoon the year after, right? For I think did I get that right? But
when he scored 2 goals to tie it up,
yeah,
that was almost more impressive.
yes.
None of us will remember it because the Americans won.
John Carlson. So I'll ask you just one last question, just about this Leafs team. Does it feel different? I know I've been listening to your podcast. They've shown so much resilience. Haven't lost in many games in regulation outside of last night. But just talk about how you feel about this team, and do you feel as though they can be a Stanley Cup threat?
The Leafs have a lot more fight in them than they showed at the beginning of the season. And it's not about going out and beating up everyone and dropping the gloves at every opportunity. It's just not letting your team get run over. It's a willingness to stick up for yourself. It's a willingness to be a bit of a jerk to the other team after whistles and stuff like that, all while still doing all of the things that have made them successful in the past. Speed, skill, obviously elite passing and shooting at the top of their lineup. But the Leafs are just such a more difficult night for teams to handle than they've been in previous years. Like even on games where the Leafs have been outplayed, like listen, you should want to have the puck. I don't think anyone's denying that. But if you don't have it, you might as well beat the other team up and crush them a little bit, hit them. And that's made the Leafs frustrating over the last few years. Is they had the puck more than their opponent most games, but in the games where they didn't have the puck more, it's like, okay, so you're less skilled and you're soft. That strategy only works if you're by far the best team in the league, and it's just really difficult to be that in a hard cap world with injuries and everything. So there's a work ethic to this team that they haven't necessarily had in the past.
I want to ask you one question. I know that you love the NHL and specifically Gary Bettman. So, what would your first rule change be if today Gary Bettman resigns and gives you the mantle as the next commissioner of the NHL?
Well, I'm firing Bill Daly. He can't be my deputy. Probably that. Oh man, it's a really good question. Probably overhaul officiating and the Department of Player Safety. It's a joke, and like you get, I think it was Ryan Strome in Anaheim.
Yep.
Taking out Kyle Connor for the next 6 to 8 weeks, he gets 2 games out of 82. Gets suspended something like 2.5 or 3% of the season. That's a joke. So probably something along those lines.
And then I would imagine SDPN billboards everywhere on NHL rinks. I think that would be an ads on all over TV. But thanks so much, Steve, for taking the time and doing this. Anything you want to plug for SDPN? Easter seals. I know with your sister, just anything you want to plug before I send you on your way.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, this holiday season, if you're ever looking to donate, Easter Seals Ontario, never a bad choice. And just don't just watch SDPN, although I would like you to watch SDPN. But don't just watch us. Subscribe, click like, interact. Uh, Let us know how you like it.
Well, I think I've subscribed on every single platform I can for SDPN. So I really appreciate, Steve, you taking the time and doing this, and have a great holidays. And thanks again for doing this.
Thanks, Alex. You too.